The phrase sounded quiet, almost in a whisper, but its echoes shook the world of Asian entertainment. In one statement touted as the most candid confession of his career, Cha Eun-woo, a visual icon, top actor, and idol who has always been synonymous with the image of the untouchable, has finally opened the one door that for years was sealed shut. Not about a drama project, nor about an album or a tour, but about the most personal life decision. He set the date of the engagement at the beginning of 2026. This news spread like lightning. In a matter of minutes, the social media timeline turns into a sea of emotions. Some are silent, some are crying, some refuse to believe, and some are slowly trying to accept. Cha Eun-woo, the imaginary first love of millions of fans, suddenly feels so real, a man who looks to the future, not just the camera. What makes this confession feel different is not just the content, but the way. There is no grand stage. There was no formal press conference. Nearby sources say that the statement was delivered in a calm atmosphere, in simple language, almost without dramatization. "I don't want to surprise anyone," he said, "but I also don't want to keep hiding." The sentence became key, that this decision was not impulsive, but rather the result of a long journey, silent reflection, and the courage to be honest. For many years, Cha Eun-woo was known as a very private person. Any rumors of a relationship always end in silence. Any speculation is answered with a polite smile and a safe distance. But that is precisely where the weight of this recognition is felt. If he chooses to speak now, many believe, it is because the time has indeed come, both for him and for those who faithfully follow his path. The beginning of 2026 is called a marker, not just a date on the calendar. For Eun-woo, the period symbolized a new phase. After relentless hard work, hectic schedules, and the pressure of public expectations, he wanted to organize his life in a more balanced way. "I want to be a good actor, a responsible singer, and a complete human being," the statement reads. The word man is what has left many people speechless, because so far he has often been treated more as a symbol than a person. The reaction of fans was layered. On the one hand, there is an unspoken sense of loss. The image of Cha Eun-woo being always alone collapsed instantly. On the other, a no less powerful wave of support appeared. Many adult fans voiced one thing: the happiness of their idol comes first. "If he's happy, we learn to be happy too," wrote a longtime fan who has followed Eun-woo since his trainee days. The Korean entertainment industry itself has long been at the crossroads between fantasy and reality. Idols are expected to be perfect, but they are also human. Cha Eun-woo's confession seemed to confirm a shift in the times, that honesty, while risky, is slowly gaining ground. He did not specify who the figure would be his fiancée, no name, no clue, and it is precisely the absence of details that shows the maturity of his attitude. This is not public consumption, but rather a limit that he firmly sets. Pop culture analysts see this move as an important signal. Cha Eun-woo is not just a star, he is the standard. What he does will affect the way other idols view their future. The decision to speak early, well before the date, was seen as a form of emotional responsibility towards fans. It gives time to digest, time to adjust, time to reconcile. Not a few also associate this recognition with his personal journey in recent years. Tight schedules, insistent projects, and public pressure often become an invisible burden. On several occasions, Eun-woo has alluded to loneliness in the crowd, about fatigue that does not always appear on the screen. So when he talks about fiancés, many read this as an attempt to save himself, building an emotional anchor amid the storm of popularity. The international media is watching. Big titles have sprung up, from the sensational to the reflective, but one common thread remains the same. Cha Eun-woo chose honesty. He didn't wait for the rumors to grow. He doesn't let speculation hurt anyone. He stands in front of his own narrative. For fans who are not ready, the sense of sadness is valid. The loss of vision is painful.
but to many others, this is precisely where Cha Eun-woo looks most alluring, not because of his face, but because of his courage. The courage to say, "I want my life to be whole," in a world that often demands halves. The beginning of 2026 is now symbolic, not just about engagement, but about transition, about a star who lowered the shield, albeit slightly, for the sake of a more honest future. There is no guarantee that everyone will accept. There is no certainty that this path will be smooth. Yet one thing is clear: Cha Eun-woo has made a very human choice. And perhaps it is precisely there that lies the deepest meaning of his confession, that behind the spotlight, posters, and glass screens, there is a man who wants to love and be loved without a mask. If the world is silent about it, it is because we are all, in the end, learning the same thing: to let go, to accept, and to grow. This news is not the end of Cha Eun-woo's story. It is a chapter, albeit without a title, that opens up new spaces for understanding, about idols, about fans, and about the courage to be true to yourself. The beginning of 2026 is still in sight. Time will run, emotions will subside, but this decision will be remembered as the moment when Cha Eun-woo chose to be himself, completely. The decision continued to resonate long after his last sentence was circulated. The following days became a period of silence but full of meaning. No additional clarifications, no refutations, nor attempt to dampen the reaction. Cha Eun-woo chose silence, not as an escape, but rather as an attitude. Silence that gave space, as if he wanted all parties to process this news at their own rhythm. Behind the scenes, many begin to understand that the statement was not just a personal announcement, but a long reflection on identity and direction of life. A longtime staffer who worked with him described Eun-woo as always thinking about the impact of every decision, not just for himself, but for others. So when he talks about fiancé, it's not a momentary burst of emotion. It is the result of careful, silent, and often heavy consideration. Interestingly, the public response is slowly changing. If on the first day emotional shock and rejection predominated, the following days showed a softer tone. Posts of support began to appear, not only from fans, but also from fellow artists. Without naming names or details, the messages speak of the courage to choose happiness, of the importance of living honestly amid expectations that are almost impossible to meet. Cha Eun-woo himself continued to live his schedule as usual. The camera caught him coming to the set with a calm demeanor, a slight smile, and unchanged gestures. But for those who pay more attention, there is a subtle difference. The more steady the eyes look, the noticeably lighter the steps, as if the old burden, a secret to be kept alone, was finally laid. The beginning of 2026, which was originally just a number, is now an emotional reference point. Every interview, every appearance, every portrait that is uploaded to the public cannot be separated from that one fact. But Eun-woo didn't let the narrative of his life narrow. He still talks about work, about professional responsibilities, about unfinished dreams, as if to assert his personal decision doesn't erase his dedication, it strengthens it. There is also another dimension that is rarely discussed openly. This courage has the potential to change the dynamics of the relationship between idols and fans. For years, the relationship was built on fantasy and distance. With one honest statement, Cha Eun-woo introduced a new concept: shared maturity. That loving an idol also means respecting his life choices, even if it is bitter to accept. Some fans admit it takes time. They are not angry, just sad. And that sadness, instead of being rejected, is recognized. I cried not because I hate it, but because I had to let go of the version of the dream I had been embracing. The sentence reflects a collective emotional transition, a process of grieving over illusions, then slowly accepting reality. In a broader context, Cha Eun-woo's move is read as a mirror of generational change. The idols of the new generation are no longer completely subject to the old patterns that demand total sacrifice for personal life. They started talking about boundaries, about mental health, about a future off stage. EUNWOO, with a clean reputation and great influence, became an important figure in this shift. He did not ask to be understood, he just chose to be honest. And that honesty, while jarring, carries one simple message: happiness is not betrayal to fans. On the contrary, honest happiness gives a new meaning to every work that will be born after it.
As time continues to move towards the beginning of 2026, the public may return to asking, speculating, and guessing. But one thing is certain: this moment will be remembered as a turning point. When Cha Eun-woo, with all the light that surrounds him, chooses to stand as an ordinary human being, with love, choices, and a future that he wants to build on his own. And perhaps that's where this story finds its deepest core. It's not about who he's engaged to. It's not about the date you set. Rather, it is about the courage to say, in a calm yet firm voice, "This is my life, and I am ready to live it." Time went on, but the echo of the recognition did not completely disappear. It changes shape, from excitement to contemplation, from noise to deeper conversation. Cha Eun-woo, without saying a word, actually sparked a big dialogue about the meaning of maturity in an entertainment world that has been living from dreams and pseudo-hopes. On several occasions afterwards, he was seen to be more selective in speaking, not avoiding but rearranging boundaries. He did not add details, nor did he dispute the interpretation that circulated. This attitude is read as consistency. It already says what needs to be said. The rest is a private space that does not need to be exhibited. In an industry that often demands excessive transparency, the decision to stop in time feels elegant. Observers noted one interesting thing. Cha Eun-woo's image did not collapse, it underwent a transformation. If before he was seen as a distant symbol of perfection, now he is seen as a whole figure, with life choices, courage, and consequences. For some fans, these changes feel closer, more human. His popularity has not decreased as dramatically as the initial fears, but rather shifted to a more mature phase. Behind it all, there is one common thread that keeps popping up: emotional responsibility. By setting the time long ago, EUNWOO gave an opportunity for all parties to adjust. He does not break off relations with fans, but invites them to walk in the same reality. "I want us to grow up together" is the meaning of his way of behaving, although it is never said explicitly. The beginning of 2026 is slowly losing its sensational feel and turning into a symbol of hope, not only for EUNWOO, but also for the industry that is starting to dare to rearrange standards. Many see this moment as a precedent, that an idol can be honest without having to lose everything, that love and career do not always negate each other. There is also a quiet side that is rarely seen. In the midst of support and the spotlight, big decisions always bring solitude. Choosing your own path means being ready to accept interpretations, criticism, even disappointment. But from his consistent attitude, it appeared that EUNWOO had come to terms with the possibility. He does not seek justification, only tranquility. Towards the next times, his works began to be read with a new lens. Every dialogue, every lyric, every expression seemed to contain a deeper layer of maturity, not because he changed into someone else, but because he was more true to himself. And that honesty seeps into the work, making it feel warmer, more real. For the fans who stayed, the relationship evolved from ownership to respect, from fantasy to appreciation. Many have realized that loving idols doesn't have to mean holding them in one version forever. It is precisely by letting go that love finds a more mature form. In the end, this story is not about the end of a dream, but about the beginning of a new understanding. Cha Eun-woo didn't end the story, he opened it in a different direction.
The path may not be easy, it may not always be acceptable, but honest. And when someday the beginning of 2026 really comes, the moment will be remembered not as the day of the collapse of an illusion, but as the point at which an idol chooses to live fully. With quiet courage, he steps into the future, leaving no one behind, just inviting all to see him as a growing human being. The story continues to move, not with new bursts, but with long, steady breaths. After the wave of emotions subsided, one collective consciousness emerged. Cha Eun-woo's decision was not a momentary event, but rather a process of becoming an adult before a public that has long been accustomed to require the permanence of dreams. In the discussion rooms of fans, the topic is slowly shifting from why now to how after this. Many began to talk about Eun-woo's future as an actor, about the choice of perhaps bolder roles, about the possibility of deeper expression, as if by one honest confession he opened the door to a new interpretation of his entire career. Interestingly, there was no impression that Cha Eun-woo wanted to change who he was in the public eye. He didn't do emotional rebranding. There was no "I am no longer who I used to be" narrative. Quite the opposite. He looks consistent, calm, and restrained. The difference is only one. He no longer hides the fact that his life is moving forward, just like everyone else's. For the industry, this moment became a mirror. For years, an unwritten standard placed idols in an impossible position, loved by many, but not allowed to choose one. With his courage, Eun-woo seems to say that personal happiness is not a threat to professionalism, that commitment to work can go hand in hand with commitment to life. There's also a quiet narrative growing among longtime fans, those who have followed Eun-woo since the early days when things were not as rosy as they are now. Many of them felt as if they were watching someone they grew up with. "We are also getting older," wrote one fan. "Maybe it's time we learn to love differently." The sentence is simple, but full of meaning. Without realizing it, Cha Eun-woo became a symbol of generational transition, from idol guarded by fantasy to public figures respected for honesty. He didn't patronize, didn't lead a movement, didn't make a manifesto. He just lived the way he chooses, and that's exactly what makes his impact so far-reaching. Any public appearance after the confession felt like a tacit statement that he's okay, that the world does not collapse, that the love of fans does not necessarily disappear. The relationship changes shape, but it still exists, calmer, more mature, more realistic. When people again asked about the beginning of 2026, the answer remained the same: no details, and therein lies its strength. Cha Eun-woo didn't sell his future as a story, he kept it as life. The line was clear, and for the first time, many voted in his honor. In the end, this story will be remembered not so much for its sensations as for its calmness, because one simple sentence spoken without drama yet changes things. "I set my engagement date for early 2026. The sentence is not an invitation to speculate, but rather a reminder that behind all the spotlight, there is the most basic non-negotiable right, the right to choose to be happy. And perhaps that's precisely where Cha Eun-woo left his strongest imprint, not just as an actor, not just as an idol, but as a man who dared to step into the future without denying the past and without asking anyone to come along, except for those who are ready to walk with a new understanding. The silence that follows actually makes room for a deeper meaning. With no follow-up statements, no layered clarifications, Cha Eun-woo let time do its own thing, and time, slowly, turns surprise into acceptance, not because everyone is fully prepared, but rather because of the fact of finally finding his place. Behind the spotlight that stays on, Eun-woo lives his days in the same rhythm: rehearsals, filming, schedules, professional obligations. But there is one shift that those who are sensitive feel: a fuller calmness. as if the decision had closed a long chapter full of prudence and opened a new page that was no longer filled with misgivings. Many are beginning to realize that Cha Eun-woo's greatest courage is not setting the date, but declaring it. He knew the risks, he knew the consequences, but he also knew that delaying honesty would only magnify the wound. By choosing to speak early, he transformed potential shocks into a shared process, slow, human, and full of breathing space. The narrative of losing is slowly changing. For some fans, the sense of loss transformed into pride, that their beloved idols are not stuck forever in the image that others have built, that he dared to choose a full life, even if it meant carrying an emotional burden that was not light. In silence, many admit the decision was not easy, and precisely because it was, it deserved respect. The beginning of 2026 is no longer a frightening shadow. It becomes a horizon point, something that is ahead, but not to be feared today. Refocus on the present, works in progress, roles under construction, and unfinished journeys. EUNWOO remains standing there, not as a fractured symbol, but rather as a growing figure.
In a broader context, this story teaches one important thing, that the maturity of the public is also tested. Can we love without having? Can we support without demanding? Can we accept that the idol belongs to no one but himself? Those questions are not answered with words, but with time. When that moment comes, the world will be full again. But right now, what remains is that understanding is slowly growing, that not all stories need thrills, that not all happiness should be highlighted, and that the quietest courage often leaves the most impact. Cha Eun-woo didn't close the door for his fans, it simply moves the key from fantasy to reality, from possession to reverence. And there, this story finds its natural closure, not with applause or crying, but with the shared realization that loving also means letting go. That's how one simple sentence has rearranged a lot of things. No chapters, no dramatic breaks, no exaggerated claims, just a life decision spoken honestly, and the world learns, little by little, to accept it. And precisely because there is no exaggerated climax, the story feels even more real. There are no aftershocks of emotions, no further confessions that provoke new sensations. There is only sustainability, a word that is rarely celebrated but most truthfully describes life. Cha Eun-woo continued his pace, and the world, willy-nilly, learned to adjust to the rhythm. In the midst of a rapidly changing news flow, his story survived not because of controversy, but because of meaning. Many began to place this recognition as a moment of collective maturation, the moment when the public stopped asking who and began to understand why. Why would someone who has given so much to the stage, the screen, and the fans deserve to keep one small space to himself? Not few see this decision as a form of trust. Cha Eun-woo's trust in his fans, that they are mature enough to accept the truth, even if it hurts. The belief that relationships built over the years will not collapse just because one phase of life changes. And slowly, the trust proved to be not in vain. Behind all the interpretations, there is one consistent thing. Cha Eun-woo has never put himself as a victim or a hero. It does not seek sympathy, nor does it seek validation. He simply conveyed the facts of his life in a calm tone, as if to say that this was part of the journey, not something to be endlessly demonstrated or debated. The fans who chose to survive found a new way to love, no longer with hidden hopes, but with more honest support. They are waiting for a masterpiece, not a miracle. They look forward to roles, not illusions. And in the process, the relationship is formed noticeably stronger because it stands on reality, not a one-sided dream.
The beginning of 2026 is getting closer in consciousness, but further away from anxiety. It is no longer spoken of as a day of loss, but as a day of change. Change is inevitable, but it doesn't have to be painful. A change that marks that even an idol has the right to step into the next phase without having to erase the traces he has left. If this story has a final message, it may not come in the form of a sentence, but rather a feeling that is left behind. The feeling that the world of entertainment, slowly but surely, is learning to breathe more freely. That idols and fans do not have to be bound by exhausting unspoken promises. That the love that lasts the most is the one that gives space. Cha Eun-woo stays where he is, between the spotlight and real life, with a new balance. He doesn't go away. He doesn't turn into anyone else. He only steps forward, carrying his intact self. And perhaps that's where this story finds its deepest meaning. Not about the fiancé, not about the date, but rather about the courage to live honestly in a world that rarely gives permission for it. The pace continued to reverberate, not as a deafening echo, but as a steady pulse. The longer it gets, the more it feels like this story isn't about one public figure per se, but rather about relationships that are learning to mature. Cha Eun-woo didn't change the direction of the spotlight. It was the glare that slowly changed the way he looked. Between the breaks in the schedule and the work routine, a small, unwritten narrative arises about inner calm. People who work around it describe a lighter atmosphere, more honest communication, and a noticeably fuller focus, as if the decision to no longer keep big secrets made room for cleaner creative energy. He remains a perfectionist, remains disciplined, but no longer overshadowed by the fear of if one day it is revealed. These changes seeped into the public subtly. Subsequent interviews sound more reflective. The answers are not long, but solid. He talks about process, about teamwork, about gratitude. No excessive romanticization, no sentences that provoke wild interpretations, and it is precisely that simplicity that makes him feel mature. Initially silent fans began to find a new foothold. They form a different support language, calmer, more understanding, not because love is diminished, but because it finds another form, from I want to have it to I want to see it happy. A small but decisive shift. In the wider pop culture conversation, Cha Eun-woo's name is now often cited as an example of balance, that maintaining privacy doesn't mean hiding, and sharing the truth doesn't have to sacrifice boundaries. He does not open the door as wide as it should be, but also doesn't lock it tightly. He chose enough loopholes to be honest without losing yourself. The beginning of 2026 still stands as a marker, but no longer overshadows every day. It becomes a coordinate point, not a center of gravity. Refocus on the present day, on the work that is being lived, on the roles that are being formed, on the relationships that are being cared for. And that's where life goes as it should, not always dramatically, but meaningfully. When this story is later retold, perhaps what is remembered most is not the date, but the sentence, but rather the attitude. Calm attitude in the middle of the wave. Honest attitude without demands. An attitude that recognizes that being a public figure does not negate the most basic rights as a human being. Cha Eun-woo didn't ask to be notified. He did not demand to be understood. He simply stepped up, in the belief that honesty, while risky, is ultimately lighter to carry. And the world, slowly, with all its dynamics and feelings, learns to walk beside him. That's how this story continues. No chapters, no flashy breaks, no dramatic endings. Only life moves forward, carrying one simple but powerful message, that the courage to be honest is the highest form of maturity, and that the most sincere love is the one that gives room. And at this point, the tale no longer needs affirmation. It stands alone, solidified by a consciously chosen silence. Cha Eun-woo didn't correct perceptions, nor did it form a counter-narrative. It allows meaning to grow organically, among fans who are learning to accept, among an industry that is beginning to adjust, and within itself that is finding new footing. There are subtle changes that are only felt when noticed slowly. The way he smiled no longer kept a burden. The way he listened to questions felt more present. The way he works shows an undivided focus, not because a new love changes him, but rather because honesty gives him breathing room. In a world that demands a flawless image, honesty is a rare luxury, and he chose it. Some people may still wonder, is this the beginning of distance? Is this a sign of an emotional breakup between an idol and fan? But time gave a calm answer. No. What happens is not separation, but redefinition. The relationship doesn't break, it grows, from dependence to respect, from expectation to trust. The beginning of 2026 is still the future. It has not yet arrived, and therefore there is nothing to celebrate or fear today. There are days that are lived with full responsibility, in work, in public, and in oneself. Cha Eun-woo remains standing on the same stage, on the same screen, with the same dedication. The difference is only one thing. He no longer puts off himself in order to meet the shadow of others. When the time comes, the world will be full again. But whatever form it will take, its foundations are already being laid today, with honesty, calmness, and clear boundaries. No sudden surprises, no wound allowed to enlarge, just a process, lived together, step by step. And that's where this story finds its essence, not as sensational news, but as a marker of the times, that idols can choose life without having to lose meaning, that fans can love with...
Cha Eun-woo didn't close the story. It just goes on, in a more honest, calmer, and more human way. A small step that has a big impact. A personal choice that teaches the public to see in a new way. And perhaps that's the quietest yet most powerful legacy of one simple sentence he's ever uttered. But like all true-to-life stories, it doesn't stop at a neat conclusion. He continues to walk, mingling with ordinary days, with routines that seem simple but full of meaning. Cha Eun-woo didn't stand at the intersection to look back for too long. He steps, carrying the past as a foundation, not a burden. Slowly, the public realized that nothing was really missing. The smile is still there. The dedication remains intact. The professionalism that has been his characteristic has become even stronger. The personal decisions he made did not undermine his love for the world in which he grew up. If there is a change, it comes in the form of depth, a calmer way of looking, a more honest expression, and a more conscious choice. For many, this was the moment when Cha Eun-woo stopped being just an idealized figure and began to be remembered as a real person, not because of his shortcomings, but because of his courage to admit that life is constantly moving, that happiness is not always in harmony with public expectations, but still worth fighting for. The beginning of 2026 is now no longer just a stressful date. It became a symbol of courage to determine one's own direction, a symbol that there comes a point in life when one has to choose between staying in the image or stepping towards wholeness. And Cha Eun-woo, with all the accompanying consequences, has made his choice. What remains for the public is not a demand, but rather a silent invitation to learn to accept change without losing respect, to understand that mature love does not curb, to realize that an idol is not a dream that must be frozen, but a human being who also has the right to grow. And perhaps, when someday this story is recalled, it will be remembered not so much the crowd as the calm, not the title, but the way it was written. Cha Eun-woo didn't create a scandal. He created spaces for himself, spaces for his fans, and spaces for the industry to learn to breathe more freely. The story goes on and on, with no chapters, no dramatic breaks, no forced ending, like life itself. And therein lies its strength, a decision taken honestly, lived calmly, and accepted slowly, until it ends up being part of the journey, no longer news. And as this story continues to be told, it begins to resemble a calm stream, no longer beating but flowing. Cha Eun-woo is in the middle of the stream, neither resisting nor being carried away passively. He drives with full awareness, knowing where to anchor while accepting that small waves will always be there. What now feels most powerful is no longer the news, but the impact. Many young fans began to talk about healthy boundaries, about dreams that should change over time. They learn indirectly that admiring does not have to mean negating oneself or the person being admired, that mature love does not demand promises that are impossible to keep. In his silence, Cha Eun-woo sets a rare example: consistency. He does not repeat his statements, does not use them for sympathy, nor does he package them as a strategy. He treats the decision as it should be, as a part of life, not a commodity. And precisely because of this story lasted longer than the usual news cycle. The beginning of 2026 now comes as a reasonable timeline, neither excessive sacredness nor avoidance. It exists as other days exist, waiting to be lived, not debated. The public's focus returned to the works, to the achievements, to the long journey that still lies ahead. And that's where Cha Eun-woo stood, giving his best without having to sacrifice himself. If there's one lesson that settles slowly, it's this: honesty isn't always devastating. Sometimes he just saves. Saves from greater prejudice, from deeper wounds, from unnecessary distance. By speaking up when the time was right, Cha Eun-woo chose a difficult yet clear path. In the end, this story does not demand a cover. It is enough to let it live, grow with time. Like any mature decision, it does not need to be proven every day. It just needs to be lived. And Cha Eun-woo, with the calmness that now characterizes him, did it step by step. That's how it is this story continues, not as a sensation, but as a journey of a public figure who chooses to be whole, and a world that slowly learns that wholeness is worthy of respect. And the further this story goes, the more it becomes clear that its strength lies precisely in the simplicity of attitudes. There is no attempt to control opinions. There is no emotional strategy to calm all parties. Cha Eun-woo seemed to understand one important thing: not all feelings should be resolved at once. There are emotions that do take time to find their own form. At this point, the public began to see it with a different point of view. No longer just a perfect figure, but someone who dares to choose an honest path, albeit not entirely safe. And that courage slowly fosters a deeper respect than pseudo-admiration. Respect that does not depend on status, but rather on integrity. The relationship between Cha Eun-woo and his fans also entered a quieter but solid phase, no longer boisterous by unspoken expectations, but bound by growing understanding. Many realize that supporting does not always mean demanding emotional closeness. Sometimes supporting means standing a little farther away, close enough to see, far enough not to tie. The beginning of 2026 now feels like a natural continuation, not a surprise. A point to be crossed, not a peak to be dramatized. And perhaps that's what calms the most. There is no sense of being chased by time, no tension is maintained. Life goes as it should, and the decision merges in it without having to be constantly highlighted. If there's one thing left of all this, it comes as a slow realization that the world of entertainment is also adult learning,
that the idol is no longer fully positioned as a static dream, but rather as a human being who moves, changes, and chooses. And Cha Eun-woo, in his calm manner, became one of the signifiers of that change. This story continues to flow, not towards a specific end, nor does it stop at one moment. It became part of a long journey where honesty was no longer considered a threat, but a foundation. And as long as that step is lived with awareness, the world will continue to adjust. That's how this story has survived. No chapters, no dramatic culmination, no forced closure. Only life goes on, decisions are respected, and Cha Eun-woo steps forward, calm, whole, and just the way he is.